Good morning, traders. Today I want to introduce you to version 4 of the Advanced Risk Reward. To be honest, on many occasions we have our strategy clear, but in the middle of the chaos of the market, any additional decision can be decisive in distracting us and causing us to end up making a bad decision. Imagine a trader who, in addition to having to decide whether to enter or not, also has to start calculating how many contracts correspond to them so as not to risk more than necessary, decide how to distribute those contracts among their targets, protect the position on time, and do all of that while the market is moving. It is exasperating. In this first part of the video, I will show you why this tool can change your trading, and in the second part, we will learn how to use it. The Advanced Risk Reward is designed so that you can define your logic clearly, save it in templates, and then let the tool adapt that logic to the real trade you have in front of you. That is, it does not force you to reinvent your way of trading in every entry. On the contrary, it takes the rules you have already decided on and makes them dynamic, fast, and applicable to the real market. Let's break it down into each of its functionalities and why it solves many shortcomings of NinjaTrader. Let's start with something fundamental: the automatic contract calculation to always risk the same amount of money per trade. If you decide, for example, that you want to risk $200 per trade, you would normally have to stop during your trading session to analyze how many contracts you should enter depending on the distance between your entry and your stop. Then you would have to go to the chart trader, change the quantity manually, and only then be ready to enter. But let's be honest, that in real trading is very complicated, and in many cases it becomes almost impossible because the market moves constantly and the size of the stop changes second by second. The Advanced Risk Reward solves this problem for you. The tool takes the real distance between your entry and your stop and automatically calculates how many contracts correspond to you in order to respect the risk you defined. Thus, if in one trade you need 5 contracts and in another you need 10, you do not have to stop to recalculate anything manually. The tool does it for you. You do not even need to go change the quantity in the chart trader. If you so decide, the tool can update it automatically. You simply sit down and make your trading decision. Now then, when contracts change dynamically, another problem is born. If the number of contracts changes every second because the tool is looking for the correct quantity to maintain your risk while the market fluctuates, then using NinjaTrader's normal limit and stop order buttons can leave you out of sync. Because NinjaTrader will place the order with the exact number of contracts that existed at the moment of the click. But if the tool keeps moving and adjusting the quantity, you can end up with an order placed with an old quantity. That is why this tool also includes special buttons to solve that problem. The Buy STLT and Sell STLT buttons allow us to obtain a waiting line that stays alive and keeps changing the number of contracts based on the chart trader without becoming outdated. And when we are ready to place the order, we simply click and it is sent with the quantity updated at that moment. This makes execution much faster, much more coherent, and much more efficient for dynamic trading. But the problem is not only knowing how many contracts to enter with, you also have to decide how to distribute those contracts among the different take profits. And that is another point where the traditional ATM falls short for this type of trading. If the total number of contracts changes every second, then the correct distribution by targets also changes every second. Thinking about that manually in real time is simply not practical. That is why this tool also allows you to define in advance how you want to distribute your contracts. You can do it by equivalence, so that the distribution is homogeneous among the active levels. Or you can do it by fixed quantity, specifying exactly how many contracts you want at each level, and letting the remaining amount be placed where appropriate. In that way, it does not matter whether in one trade you enter with few contracts and in another with many. The tool is already prepared to distribute them correctly according to your rules. On the other hand, this version also incorporates a manual break-even. And this may seem like a small improvement, but in practice, it is enormous. because many times the trader does want to protect the trade, but moving the mouse to the exact point where they want to place the stop, above or below the entry point, can become an uncomfortable, slow, and distracting task. With this tool, you have a button to do it with a single click, and with the distance you have previously defined. Thus, you free your mind to focus on what is really important, which is reading the market and managing your decision well. We also have the auto-trailing stop. If you want to automate the movement of the stop loss, this tool also solves it, and in fact corrects a very big shortcoming of NinjaTrader. In NinjaTrader, the traditional auto-trailing stop is very limited to working by ticks. That is, you can tell it something like, if the price advances a certain number of ticks, move my stop to a certain number of ticks above or below the entry. But for many people that does not work well, because not all trades are the same. The distances change, the targets are sometimes wider and other times smaller, and the volatility of the market is not the same every day. That is why defining all the logic only in ticks is often not the smartest way to work. With this tool, you will be able to do auto-trailing stop by ratios, by ticks, or by percentages. That means you can decide that the protection is activated when the price reaches a certain ratio, a certain number of ticks, or a certain percentage of progress within a zone. You can even do it by steps, so that the protection advances progressively as the trade evolves. It is a much more flexible and intelligent way of managing the stop loss. In summary, if you like the tool, now let's learn how to use it. To use it, we will first go to the NinjaTrader chart where you will make your trades. We right-click on the chart, select the Indicators option, and within the Indicators window, we will look for the indicator called RRR Chart Trader. Is the abbreviation for Advanced Risk Reward. Once we place the indicator and double-click on it, there is really nothing important to configure in its properties. Just click on Apply and then on OK. Now yes, in the Chart Trader we will have several buttons. First of all, we will see a selector. This is the selector where we will choose the template that contains the configuration of the tool we want to use for our trades. By default, there will be an option called Default. But we can create different templates and have different configurations according to our trading style. Each template covers not only the configuration of the main tool, but also that of the break-even and the auto-trailing stop. Later, we will see exactly what configurations we can assign to each template. On the other hand, we also have two buttons, the Draw Add button and the Draw Simple button. The Draw Simple button will allow us to plot a risk-reward tool solely as a measurement. It will not have any additional functionality. It will not modify contracts, it will not have ATM, it will not execute automations, nor will it change anything in our trading. It will simply be a visual tool with various ratios for measuring scenarios. We can modify it by double-clicking on the tool, and there we will find different settings, such as the number of targets, the number of stops, the ratios for each target, the ratios for each stop, their colors, and their design. On the other hand, we will have the Draw Add button. This is the important one for trading. This button allows us to plot the advanced tool that will help us truly manage our trades. This one will have a direct effect on the ATM, the contracts, the break-evens, the trailing, and other functions. We click on the button and plot the tool on the chart. Once it is placed, all the buttons that previously appeared locked will be able to start being used. This tool already comes with a default configuration that we will be able to modify from the Settings button. It is important to understand this. By clicking on Settings, we will be modifying the configuration of the currently selected template. In this example, we will modify the default template. If we want to create a new template with a different configuration, we simply click on the plus button, give it a name, and make the configurations we want. If we then want to delete a template, we click on the minus button while having selected the template we want to delete. Now then, let's look at the characteristics we can give each template. Template modification. Let's click on the Settings button and a new window will open. These templates will come with a default configuration designed to adapt to the common denominator of people, but each person will be able to adjust them according to their own trading style. First of all, we have price tracking. Price tracking enables the tool to move its entry point according to where the current market price is. This prevents us from having to move the tool manually all the time in order to adapt it to what is happening. The tool will do it by itself. This tracking can be done in two ways, on each tick change or at bar close. If we choose on each tick change, the entry point will move every time the market moves. On the other hand, if we choose at bar close, then the entry point of the tool will only move when the bar closes, and it will remain positioned at that price until the next bar also closes. You can leave price tracking enabled, which is the most advisable, or disable it if for some reason you prefer the entry point to remain fixed while the market moves forward. I advise you to leave it enabled, although of course you can turn it off if your trading requires it. Additionally, if we press the gear in this section, we will be able to make more configurations related to price tracking. For example, you can choose how you want the stop loss to behave when the price moves due to price tracking. Here you have two modes, by structure or by fixed distance. If you choose to work by structure, the stop remains fixed in its place, and what moves is only the entry point. On the other hand, if you choose fixed distance, the distance between the entry and the stop remains constant, so both can move while preserving that separation. This is important because it completely changes the way the tool adapts to the market. Wanting the stop to remain anchored to a structure is not the same as wanting it to follow an exact separation in ticks or price. On the other hand, we have the contracts functionality. If we activate it, the tool will begin to function as a contract calculator. That is, it will automatically calculate the number of contracts we must enter in order to risk a specific amount of money on each trade, regardless of the distance between the entry point and the stop loss. To configure it, we will click on the gear button and we will find several parameters. First, we have the calculation mode. Here we will choose how we want to obtain the risk per trade. It can be a fixed monetary value, or it can be a percentage of the account. For example, if we choose a fixed monetary value, we are saying that per trade we want to lose that amount. Let's suppose $200. But if we choose a percentage of the account, then we are saying that we want to risk a certain percentage of the current value of the account per trade. For example, if we choose 1% and our account is currently at $100,000, then that trade will seek to risk approximately $1,000. For this example, we will leave it as a fixed value of $200 per trade. Additionally, we have the option of maximum number of contracts. Some prop firms or funding firms allow trading only up to a certain maximum number of contracts. Sometimes, the tool could calculate that you need more contracts than allowed in order to risk the amount you desire. That is why here you can establish a limit. If the tool calculates a higher amount, then it will respect that maximum you have defined, even if that causes you to risk less on that trade than originally planned. If you do not wish to limit it, you can enter a very high number, such as 999999. Then we have the rounding rule. The rounding rule is a setting that allows you to decide when the tool should move up to the next contract and when it should move down to the previous one. Think of it this way. The tool first calculates an ideal number of contracts to meet your risk objective. But since in practice, you cannot trade fractional contracts, for example 3.6 contracts, because in futures, only whole numbers exist, the tool needs to convert that result into a real integer, 3 or 4. That is where this rule comes in. If the decimal part of the calculation is equal to or greater than the threshold you establish, the tool rounds up. If the decimal part is lower than that threshold, it rounds down. For example, if in order to risk $200, the tool calculates 3.6 contracts, the decimal part is 0.6. If your rule is set at 0.5, since 0.6 is greater than or equal to 0.5, the tool will move up to 4 contracts. If the rule were set higher, for example at 0.7, in that case it would move down to 3. Lastly, the tool comes prepared so that the contracts change automatically in the chart's chart trader. This is made to avoid the user having to change the quantity manually, because in dynamic trading, that simply becomes unsustainable. But if for some reason you do not want it to update automatically, you can also disable it. If what you want is for the tool not to function as a contract calculator, that is, if you want the quantity to be decided by you manually and not by the tool, then you can simply turn this mode off, and thus the advanced risk reward will stop calculating the contracts for you. Now we will move on to a very important point, which is the ATM strategy. This tool is designed so that the management of targets and stops is based on the advanced risk reward's own visual and operational logic. The idea is that you define in advance where you want your levels to be, and that the tool manages them based on that structure.
If you want the tool to manage the target and stop orders, which is the most advisable, in order to take advantage of the features we will talk about next, then leave the tool's ATM strategy enabled. To see the features we can give it, we will go to the Gear button. Here we will find several functionalities. First of all, we have the option of placing the targets and the stops at the tool's levels. This is truly part of the meaning of the tool, and that is why it cannot be disabled. If the tool did not place the targets and the stops at its own levels, then it would stop having operational coherence. As a second point, we have the option of fixing the targets and the stops at the levels when the user moves the tool or modifies its position. If you want the targets and the stops to follow their levels according to the new movement when adjusting the tool in the middle of the trade, then leave it turned on. If you prefer them not to move, you can leave it turned off. I personally advise you to leave it turned on. Now here comes an especially important part. The problem with NinjaTrader's traditional ATM is that it is designed for when we already know exactly how many contracts we are going to enter from the beginning, and not for when the quantity changes dynamically. Since it is not designed for that scenario, a serious problem appears. Many times it ends up placing too large a portion of contracts in the first target, or distributing them in a way that does not necessarily match the logic we wanted. Since the total number of contracts can change second by second, the correct distribution by targets can also change second by second, and thinking about that manually, in real time, is not practical. That is why this tool allows you to decide the distribution method in advance. You can do it by equivalent proportion, so that the distribution is homogeneous among the active levels. To do this, choose the equivalent proportion option in the type and select which targets you want to participate. You are not forced to have all the target levels that are visually seen in the tool participate. You could have, for example, 5 visible targets, but decide that only 3 participate in the real distribution. The homogeneous distribution will be done only among those 3. In the same way, you could choose 2, 1, or all 5. On the other hand, you can also do it by fixed quantity of contracts, specifying exactly how many contracts you want to assign to each level. Here you can also choose which levels will participate in the real distribution. Those that do not participate will remain only as visual reference. In this mode, the contracts are assigned in order, starting from the nearest target onward, trying to fill the quantities you configured. For example, if you place 5 contracts in the first target and 5 in the second, but you ultimately enter with 8 contracts, then the tool will first fill the lower target with 5, and then place the remaining 3 in the next target. If the trade has more contracts than the total sum you configured, then the leftover contracts will be assigned automatically to the lowest target. Finally, within the tool's configuration, we also have 3 additional drop-down buttons. With the Design button, we will obtain all the visual configuration. From there, you can enable or disable information, change colors, lines, opacities, styles, and in general,
everything that has to do with the appearance of the tool. That is, everything visual, not functional. Then we have the Stop and Targets buttons. In Stop, we can add visual stops to the tool and decide the ratio of each of them. It is important to understand that this is only visual. It will not by itself impact your contracts or your ATM. The real ATM configuration is the one we saw earlier. In the same way, we have the Targets drop-down button where we can add visual targets to the tool and decide the ratio of each of them. Again, this is only visual and does not by itself change the contract logic or the ATM configuration, which was already defined previously. That would be everything regarding the main configuration of the tool. But that is not all. There are still more. There is a very common problem in dynamic trading. If the number of contracts changes every second because the tool is looking for the correct amount in order to respect the risk, then using NinjaTrader's traditional order buttons can leave you with an order launched with an already outdated quantity. That is why the tool incorporates its own buy and sell stop limit buttons. These buttons allow us to obtain a waiting line that remains synchronized with the number of contracts in the chart trader without becoming outdated. When we are ready to place the order, we simply click, and it will be sent with the correct quantity for that moment. In addition, the tool automatically recognizes the order type depending on where you place the line. For example, in buy, if we place the line above the current price, we know that a stop market order will be placed. But if we place it below the current price, a limit order will be placed. In the same way, in sell STLT, if we place the line below the current price, we know that a stop market order will be placed. But if we place it above the current price, a limit order will be placed. On the other hand, with the Invert LS button, we can change the direction of the tool with a single click, without having to manually rearrange the entire structure. This saves a tremendous amount of time, especially when the context changes quickly and we need to go from a long idea to a short idea or vice versa, without wasting time redrawing. Now we come to a very interesting part, the break-even and the auto-trailing stop. Many times, the trader does want to protect the trade, but moving the mouse to the exact point where they want to place the stop can be uncomfortable, imprecise, and distracting. With this tool, you have a button to do it with a single click. To use it, we activate its checkbox. In this way, every time we want to send the stop loss to break even, we simply click on the break even button and that is it. Additionally, if we click on the gear, we can configure an offset in ticks, both positive and negative. This offset will cause the stop to be placed a certain number of ticks above or below the entry point, according to what we have defined. Now let's go to the auto-trailing stop. If you want to automate the movement of the stop loss, you can also do it from here. To activate it, we simply check the corresponding checkbox. And pay attention to this. Once activated, you are already allowing the stop loss to move automatically when the rules you have configured are met. That is, it is not a decorative button. It is a real automation of the stop's movement. To configure it, we click on the Configure Auto Trailing Stop button. When the configuration window opens, we will see three working modes: ratios, ticks, and percentages. Let's start with ratios, which is very easy to understand. Here you will configure the auto trailing by steps. In each step you will have a condition and an action. The condition will say something like, when the price reaches ratio X, and the action will say, move the stop loss to ratio Y. In addition, you can add an offset so that the stop is placed some ticks above or below the specified point. For example, imagine that you have 3 steps configured. In the first step, you are saying that when the price reaches ratio 1, then the stop loss will move to the entry level plus 1 tick. In the second step, if the price then reaches ratio 2 and you are still in the position, then the stop loss will move to the ratio 1 level plus 1 tick. And in the third step, if the price is still not taking you out and reaches ratio 3, then the stop loss will move to the ratio 2 level plus 1 tick. And so on. You can continue adding steps if your trading requires it.
Now let's look at ticks mode. This is similar to the traditional trailing that many people already know, but here you can also structure it by steps. Basically, you will create rules that say, if the price advances a certain number of ticks from the entry, then move the stop loss to a certain number of ticks relative to the entry point. For example, you could configure something like this. First step, when the price advances 10 ticks, the stop will move to 0 ticks relative to the entry point. Second step, if the price advances 20 ticks, then the stop will move to a distance of 5 ticks relative to the entry point. Third step, when the price advances 30 ticks, then the stop will move to 12 ticks relative to the entry point. In this way, the protection does not happen only once, but rather evolves as the trade advances in your favor. And if in any rule you place a negative value, then the stop can still remain below the entry, which can also make sense in certain strategies. Lastly, we have percentages mode. Here the logic is different. In this mode, we are saying that when the price reaches a certain percentage of a specific zone, then it will move the stop loss to a certain percentage of another specific zone. The zones are composed of the tool's ratio levels. In other words, the space between one level and another forms a zone, and you can work using percentages within those zones. This is very useful for those who prefer a more proportional and less rigid logic than simply thinking in ticks or exact ratios. For example, you could say something like, when the price reaches 50% of zone 2, move my stop to 50% of zone 1. That is the general logic. Finally, remember that if the zones or target levels do not visually exist, then you will not have a reference for those levels or zones in the auto-trailing stop configuration. In order to obtain their references, you need to activate them visually from the tool's configuration in the Targets dropdown. And well, traders, that would be all. I hope this tool truly helps you trade with more clarity, more speed, and less mental load. Because in the end, that is what it is about. Removing friction, removing distractions, and allowing you to better execute what you already know how to do. And if you have any questions, we will be attentive in the chat on our website, brunomeza.com. Greetings, traders.